This is a topic that I've wanted to talk about since the very first time you and I sat down in the library in downtown Greenville 3 years ago, a little bit more than 3 years ago now.
Yeah.
And talked about, let's have a podcast. What would we talk about? I'd just written a series of articles about garbage. Let's talk about garbage. And maybe some folks think we have talked about garbage a time or two. I don't know. But we are finally getting to the topic that we wanted to do from the very beginning.
Yep. And I'm so excited about this night. It's kind of a marker for us too, as we've evolved, as our podcast has grown and our listeners have gotten to know a little bit about the Afterword table. But Holland, did you know that every day the average American citizen generates 5 pounds of garbage? I mean, that's 1,642 pounds per person. It's a bag of flour per person per day. I'm starting to kind of feel down in the dumps about that.
We could do garbage puns for the whole hour, right?
Right.
Okay, we have a great pair of guests here who are ready to help share practical insights into the trash dilemma. And it's not just about how much trash we produce, but also where it goes and how that affects global politics.
Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
And you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words.
So we're fortunate to have Dr. Marian Chertow from Yale University. Her background in waste management research is absolutely amazing. So glad to have you.
And rounding out our table tonight is Jess Sedeo. She is the recycling coordinator for Spartanburg County, South Carolina. She's a certified recycling professional, environmental educator, and storm water inspector, which sounds fascinating, with over 15 years of experience in government and nonprofit fields. And just learned also tonight that she's a writer. That's exciting. She also educates adults and students on the wise use of natural resources. So Jess, we are so happy to have you here at the Afterword table.
Thank you.
So let's start with their personal stories. Could you take just 60 seconds, Marian, and share the Cliff's Notes version of your life, who you are, and how you got interested in garbage?
Well, that's still a work in process, who I am, but I'll do it anyway. Actually, my last semester of college, I was student teaching in a New York City public school, a middle school, and I thought, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to teach in the school. I was certified in English, and a buddy of mine came to visit me as just in my final semester, and she said, it's great to be a teacher, but you really ought to come work for my father. He started a recycling company, and this is, more than 30 years ago. So I said, that's amazing. I've never met your dad. And I went out to Connecticut, a state I'd barely been to ever. And sure enough, this fellow was from the Army Corps of Engineers, and he'd done a lot of work around the reconstruction of Europe after the World War. And he said, and now recycling should be easier to do. And so that was the company. That's where I got my start. And from there, I learned what people are learning today. What's a MRF? So in 1980 something, I knew what a MRF was, and material recovery facility where we recycle things. So we were pioneers in curbside recycling, and I worked for the United States Conference of Mayors because they wanted to know what to do with their waste. And so I actually had several jobs in the field, mostly in cities, but also I became the head of a bonding authority where we could build big plants and merge both waste to energy, have recycling, have organic waste collection and so forth. So after all that, believe it or not, someone said, you ought to go meet the dean of the School of the Environment at Yale. He's a great guy, and he's trying to expand his program. So I went to meet him, and he, right off the bat, he said, well, why don't you teach? So from that time forward, I've been at Yale. I got my PhD, and we started the program on solid waste policy. And now everything has sort of melted into what I do now, which is called industrial ecology. And that's really bringing in the business more to be greener and to learn new things and for us to learn from them. So other than my husband and my children, I think I've told you everything there is.
You can tell us about them too. They count.
Oh, well, they don't recycle that well. So my husband has this idea that if he puts more and more stuff into the recycling bin, he'll be better because recycling is good. Meanwhile, a lot of that stuff is causing the newest problem that we have in solid waste management today, which is contamination. You know, he shouldn't have put it in there in the first place. It gets taken to the recycling facility or the waste facility. It just piles up because you can't really recycle it. Then you got to take it to a landfill. And so it's creating a lot of high cost and inefficiency in our recycling system. It's not all his fault, honey.
Okay, so we're going to bring in someone from the School of Counseling next week for the next episode.
Oh boy!
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Holland. That'll do it.
I've already learned several new words, Amy.
I know, me too. And who knew garbage could be so fun?
Right.
Well, Jess and I knew.
I'm sorry. So you said 60 second-ish. I actually became interested in the environment approximately 1991, maybe. I watched Captain Planet, the cartoon, relentlessly, and I was making environmental propaganda posters in an elementary school art class. So this is kind of a lifelong dream, passion. My family is from, I will go ahead and admit, the backwoods of the most rural parts of Spartanburg County, South Carolina. And because of that, I've been outside. You get told, go outside and play all day long with the door slammed behind you, and you don't come in until it's time to eat. And you drink from the hose pipe, to use a Southern colloquialism. It's a hose pipe. And so I've been interested in the environment because I was out in it. I was learning about it. We would see snakes, bugs, trees, seed pods, things like that, wildlife. And I wanted to know more about it. I am also a little bit bookish, so I would read a lot, and then I would read about what I'm seeing outdoors. So I've been really interested in it for a very long time. When I was a teenager, I learned about companies being bad. Companies that were breaking laws. They were incinerating outside of their permits, dumping contaminated water or contaminated materials in waterways. And there's been a couple of local companies that have been cited and have some lawsuits against them or did at the time, and were investigated for cancer clusters. And that's when my protest spirit came out, and I started getting into the more activist side of it. Went to college for environmental studies and graduated with a Bachelor of Science, thinking I was going to be an environmental lawyer working for the side of the good guys. As it turns out, I am better suited to other tasks in the environmental field. I kind of fell into this position, but I've been an environmental educator by happenstance since 2005. I didn't even know what environmental education was. And I have decided that I was going to focus my efforts on wastewater and water quality and solid waste recycling. Oh, and to speak to my family, I have a toddler son who does know how to recycle and has demanded his own recycling bin. And I have 9 cats that do not recycle.
Oh, okay. Well, now we've leveled the playing field for everybody. So sounds like we're on a roll. This is awesome. Oh, goodness, Holland. Okay. So, yes, we are doing an episode on garbage and waste management, but I think we, just like with some of our other episodes, we throw these terms around thinking we know what they mean. I have a feeling we're up for a little education because we may not completely understand what these mean. So lightning round, it doesn't matter who takes this word, or both of you can take the word. What is a landfill, or just landfill, not a landfill? What does landfill mean?
Can I take that one, Jess?
Yes.
All right. So a landfill is the final home of a lot of waste. We can't recycle it. We can't reuse it. We can't remanufacture it. It just goes into a hole in the ground. And sometimes that hole in the ground gets really high. And that's a pile of trash. A lot of people call it Mount Trashmore. Landfills are the last resort, really. And yet, we still in the United States, we landfill over half our waste, and that's too bad. What I want to say on the scientific side is think of a landfill like a giant tea bag, and when it rains, it just oozes out and everything, and all the liquids run together. That material is called leachate, that liquid, and it's not pretty. And we have we spend a lot of money on what's called leachate control systems, so we don't contaminate the water underneath the landfill. Now we call them sanitary landfills, which is a little bit of an oxymoron, but we've made a lot of progress. The landfills are much better environmentally, but the best thing to do with waste is not to put it into a hole in the ground.
Okay, Jess, go for it.
If I may just add a little bit more, I do like to make the point that there are different types of landfills, which I'm sure we'll get into when we get to the, some other aspects of this conversation. But a landfill is specially engineered to keep your waste. It is not a place where waste decomposes or biodegrades. Everything that you put into a landfill is going to be there indefinitely because it's designed in such a way that the elements that you need for something to break down, they are not there. We don't have sunlight. We don't have oxygen. We don't have rainwater, things that people would typically expect to see. If you put newspaper and apple core out in the environment, it's going to eventually become soil. That does not happen in a landfill. So that's a key point that I want to make for what we call Class 3 MSW landfills. They don't biodegrade or decompose in any shape, form, or fashion.
Holland, I'm starting to feel a little ill here. Yeah. All right. How about trash? Is it the same? And Jess, you just used an acronym, MSW, Municipal Solid Waste. Is it the same? Is all trash the same?
No. Trash is defined, MSW is separate from total waste. And I actually did confirm the definition with this. Total waste includes industrial materials, combustion ash from incinerators, construction demolition material, which we do not include with MSW or municipal solid waste, land clearing debris, which happens in large scale construction projects, and municipal sludge, which I think is a very key distinction, that when people are cleaning out septic tanks or when something goes through a sewer, what's left over, that is not counted as the MSW number. As far as a resident, the average person that's listening to this, the average person that's not in industry, everything that you have in your house as far as trash, for our purposes, that is considered MSW. It's all the trash that the average human makes, and that includes textiles. It includes your typical recyclables. It includes your regular household garbage. It includes yard waste from your home, as well as food waste, which is a very important part of it.
All right, Marian, what can you add to that?
Well, I think we should understand that municipal solid waste has a regulatory definition in most places. And it's really the everyday stuff. So it is trash. It's the food waste and the things you find in your kitchen or maybe even in your kid's backpack or something. That all gets glommed together as municipal solid waste. And as Jess said, it's not the industrial stuff. It's just that common residential waste, commercial waste from businesses, local, from businesses, and also what we call institutional waste. So if there's schools or prisons or government buildings, all that goes under the heading of institutional waste. So it's just a way to kind of categorize the waste so that we know that that's not hazardous, it's non-hazardous, and that also is a regulatory term. So it's good old garbage, good old trash.
Yep. Okay. All right. So let's move on to this idea of waste management. It sounds kind of like another oxymoron. Can we manage waste?
I would argue that we have to manage waste. So, I mean, we are obligated culturally, socially, economically, morally to manage our waste. So, for me, that's one of those terms that when I see it, I just think, I'm not sure that I can even put an actual definition on it, because for me, it kind of comes as second nature when I'm thinking about waste management, what I do with my trash in my house. And then if I go to my office, what I wind up, how I handle that trash, how our staff handles that trash. To me, it's just one of those things that you accept as reality. So I'm not really sure that I can even define it. It's how we handle waste, whether that be landfilling, incinerating, recycling, reducing, reusing. Those types of things are all considered aspects in waste management. I forgot to say composting, but composting counts too.
Okay. Can you add something to that, Marian?
Well, just to say that waste management is a broad term. You can have waste in any kind of industry. You can have marine waste, and you can have hazardous waste, and but I think today we're really more focused on the regular old household stuff.
All right, and you all came up with a word that Holland and I had not even considered, because personally I have never even heard of it before. So I'm so excited. Wish cycling. Help us out. Go for it, Jess.
Well, before I talk about wish cycling, another term I would like to define before I even go into it is related. I want to define the term of recycling, because a lot of times when I talk to groups of people, garden clubs, church groups, things like that, even college campuses, they don't understand that there's a difference between reducing, reusing, and recycling. Recycling is very specifically the manufacture of old waste products into new products. So there is an aspect where the waste product has to be changed into something else. And a lot of times people think if they rinse out their Dasani bottle and they fill it up at the water fountain, they're recycling. That is absolutely not the case. So recycling is a very clear, distinct, separate topic than reducing or reusing. So when it comes to wish cycling, you're wishful thinking in your recycling. It's when you have a product that is not recyclable in any traditional system, and in many cases, it's not recyclable at all. And you go ahead and you place it in your curbside bin, or you take it to a recycling center and you just toss it in thinking, well, somebody will know what to do with it. And the way that recycling centers are managed, we may know what to do with it, but we can't actually do something with it because we have to have a certain volume. We have to have a market for it. We have to have a buyer. And there's a lot of elements in that process to where if you put a fire extinguisher in your curbside bin and it winds up at a materials recovery facility, yes, technically speaking, we can recycle that, but not at that materials recovery facility and not with the markets available to that particular facility. There are different ways that we can process it. But if you put it in that bin, you're wish cycling. And many times wish cycling can lead to contamination. It can lead to entire loads being so contaminated that they wind up having to be landfilled. It can also contaminate other recyclables, which is, I think, an even worse problem than you can get rid of an entire load and call it a day. But if you contaminate everything, you're taking money out of people's pockets and you're taking away from the effort that other people are making.
Holy cow. All right. Add to that, Marian.
Well, let's see. I think I already touched on wish cycling when I mentioned my beloved husband. So I don't want to commit this sin again. But it's interesting because people think think they're doing the right thing. They think they're doing somebody a favor by putting it into the recycling bin and not in the waste bin. And it's just the opposite. So it's what you wished would happen, but it's not the right thing to do.
Gotcha. All right. So thank you all so much for helping us with some of these terms that kind of levels the playing field for me, and I'm sure our listeners as well. So Jess, you mentioned a little bit, and same with you, Marian, about, putting things at the curb and, that process, but take us on a journey with that piece of garbage. What happens from the time we put our trash at the curb or take it to the collection center until ...
Well,
think,
because
Jess?
I represent the municipal aspect of it, whether it goes into a curbside bin or whether it winds up at one of the recycling centers, a truck then transports it to a materials recovery facility. In most cases, materials recovery facility, that's, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively newer technology. It's what people would call a sorting center. And a materials recovery facility employs many different types of technology to go through the materials that are brought to them and sort and separate them, bale them, and that materials recovery facility is then able to sell them to either a broker or a company that's going to purchase that baled material for use in the manufacturing industry. So from there, once it's purchased, then the materials, depending on what they are, get cleaned, get sanitized, get melted down, and get made into something new. It may go through your material that you put in your curbside bin or bring to a recycling center, may go through multiple transports to multiple different companies until they wind up with an end user. So anything that's not a recyclable, anything that's just household trash or garbage, it's going to go to either a transfer station and then a landfill, which means that it's being handled twice, or it goes straight to a landfill. In most Spartanburg County and upstate of South Carolina governments, your waste goes straight to the landfill. When it's picked up, it's brought to either Greenville County Landfill, Spartanburg County Landfill, Anderson County Landfill, something like that. But there are also regional landfills that operate in South Carolina and throughout the nation.
Okay. What do you think, Marian?
I think Jess did a great job. You asked, I think, about the whole waste stream. And I think Jess covered that, but thinking about recycling and then thinking about where that waste goes. And that's in the U.S. And there's a few little changes in other countries, but all in all, I think it's a good description, and we should leave it there.
Okay. I know my brother, I mentioned that he lives in Switzerland, and in Switzerland, they have to buy these little garbage bags. And however much garbage you put in this bag is what you get to throw away. So it's an incentive not to have too much garbage, because you do not want to have to keep buying these garbage bags. You cannot throw your garbage out unless it's in one of these BB bags. So it's kind of interesting, as you were talking about, Marian, the differences in other countries. I think maybe I read that in other countries, maybe it's 1 point something pounds per day of trash compared to 5 pounds for the U.S. So we got a way to go on that one.
And we have both ends. I mean, we have, in Japan, they make something like 12 separations, and you can walk down the bins and put each specific thing into the specific bag. Whereas, other countries, not only does all the waste go together to the landfill, but then there's families and so forth that live on or near the landfill that are picking up materials and picking out recyclables so that they can earn a living and give their kids some breakfast in the morning.
Right. Sure. Right.
And there are some what we call pay-as-you-throw or bag-type programs in the United States. There are some municipalities that do utilize those types of programs, and that does cut down on the amount of waste that people use. But there's also the caveat that they can purchase an extra bag if they want to. And I mean, if you're willing to pay for it, then pay as you throw.
Yeah. Okay. Pay as you throw. Interesting.
And I think that's really good public policy because it says that if you want to put out more garbage, you can, but you have to pay more. And so that's the kind of the principle of it. And it works. It reduces waste.
I know when I lived briefly in a town in Iowa that is home to decent-sized university called the Maharishi University of Management, which is formed around transcendental meditation. The community there, of course, is very influenced by the university, which is half or more of the population is affiliated with that. So they have established a lot of environmentally progressive policies, one of which is around recycling. And so not only are there penalties and payments if you don't recycle, but there are a lot of resources to help you recycle. So it's very easy just to toss your garbage in the right container and put it all out at the right time and trust that the people who pick it up are doing what they're supposed to do with it. And I remember moving back to South Carolina and thinking, oh, we should continue to do this. It's just not easy. You know, the carrot is, it's not even the carrot. It's just all those handy little bins and all that little process that they had set up in that town hasn't been set up in ours. So everything just kind of gets tossed in the waste can again. Yeah. But I'd like to move on now to talking about China, which was one of the things that initially intrigued me about this whole conversation around garbage. In July 2017, China announced big changes in the quality control placed on imported materials and notified the World Trade Organization that it was banning imports of 24 categories of recyclables and solid waste. Can you tell us what happened and why this whole story is really important?
Well, this is an important story. When China was growing very quickly, like in the 70s and the 80s, China just needed material all the time. And so as the time progressed, and there was a market in China for material, more and more countries and more states, and especially in the West Coast for us, would say, well, gee, we'll take it to China because they want it. And eventually, China was taking so much waste. I can tell you that there's a statistic that always stays with me that China took almost half the world's plastic since 1992, until this 2017. And I mean, that's just incredible. Why would one country do that? And unfortunately, it made the people who were exporting their waste kind of lazy because China would take whatever they got. And so there was a lot of contamination. So Holland just mentioned the 2013, what happened in 2017. But even in 2013, China passed the green fence. So we should have seen this coming. The green fence said, hey, watch it on the contamination. We want to limit that. We don't want to be messy all the time. And but no, and nothing really got better, and more was coming. And by then, China was getting wealthier and wealthier, and they were making their own waste. So for several reasons, and why should they take the waste from the whole world? So I don't criticize them for doing it. I think that they were really trying to do quality control, and they weren't getting that. And so we were so dependent on it in the U.S., and I'm talking about, California exporting over half its waste to China, right? Well, that wouldn't happen on the East Coast, but it does happen on the West Coast, and it does happen from other places. So when you put that all together, China just finally kind of had to say, well, hold your horses. We don't need this so much anymore. And it's mostly garbage anyway. And that's not our reputation that we want to have. So this had a high impact on U.S. recyclers. It's very hard to scramble and change quickly when you have, hundreds of millions of tons of waste. So towns were hit hard. I mean, let's say that recycling, a town would be paid, $25 a ton, and now suddenly they have to pay $50 a ton. That's a huge amount for a city that's already done its budget. How do you cut into the budget year and make that better? So it was a real awakening, I think, for the U.S. that we better get a little bit more independent. Now, the U.S. is never going to be fully taking care of its own recyclables, say, because we're a big country and we're an industrial country with a big population. But we should do a better job of things. One of the most surprising things that I can tell you is that the Chinese still wanted the good stuff, and they still do. The stuff that's well sorted and everything else. And so one phenomenon that happened pretty much after starting around 2018 was that Chinese entrepreneurs came to the United States and actually bought our old facilities, paper mills and plastic and so forth. And that's an amazing story too, because there's a story about what happened in Maine, and Maine had so many paper plants, and this Chinese woman actually bought their one big plant there, and could turn that same planted equipment and make it more useful again, and get a higher quality, because that's what she wanted to send back to China, not the waste, but what's really recyclable and can be reused again. So that's a quick thumbnail, but it goes on. I still hear a lot of people in the U.S. concerned and complaining about it, because where are we going to put the stuff, and how do we change? And so there's a lot of investment now in new machines, new technologies, new efficiency measures in recycling facilities, and that's a good thing. And we're starting to catch up, but we just got to stay with it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. There was a story that there is a company from China setting up a recycling plant in Blacksburg, South Carolina.
Okay.
For that very thing. That is going to be a big business in that area for folks. So fascinating.
I doubt that I have anything to add to that. My answer, because I generally speak with the public, is a little bit more simplistic. And it's simply, without trying to make residents and citizens feel bad, American recyclables are notoriously dirty. And they're contaminated. They have a lot of stuff that can't be processed, items that just don't fit. Whether or not there's an ability to break it down into its components and turning it into a new product, that's well and good, but it also has to work with the equipment available, the technology available, things like that. So China was not necessarily in the wrong to be doing this, because as Marian referenced, they've been kind of hinting around. 2013 was the first time that I was involved enough in this field to really see that they were letting us know, hey, we're having some issues with contamination, and most of what we have are residential materials, and your industrial materials, things coming from a large business that they know exactly what their waste product is. That's going to be a lot cleaner than what your average resident's going to produce because of wish cycling, because of small contaminants, things like prescription bottles that are really too small, even though they are a recyclable product. When it comes to the machinery available to us, they are very hard to process. That's just a couple of examples, but there are millions of examples. If you look at the average recycling container at a materials recovery facility, or if you go to a recycling center, I can point out a solid probably 20% in that bin that is contaminated, that cannot be processed. It's going to wind up back at the landfill.
And this kind of rattled people also, because suddenly where were you going to put everything? And a lot of recyclables ended up going into landfills in the aftermath of the China situation. And then the rumors start, oh, why did I separate my waste? It's just being sent to the landfill, and what are we doing? And prices and everything else, because the way the economy works with this. And so I think it sort of rattled people a lot about recycling, and that we've had to try to regain that. But there are some heroes on the horizon. I was at a meeting earlier today of what's called the Remade Institute. And the Remade Institute has received from the U.S. government hundreds of millions of dollars to pass on to companies, universities, NGOs, to try to catch up and to really become innovative on the subject of recycling, remanufacturing, reuse. And I found it pretty inspiring to see all the projects that were being worked on by coalitions of businesses with universities and so forth. I myself have a project on that about fiber, which in our language means cardboard and paper. How can we do it more efficiently? How can we get new technologies? And so my team is actually building a model, a techno-economic model, to be able to test not just the model, the base case, what we have right now, but others, companies, governments, everybody can come in and try and say, look, I see something new. Can I run it through your model? And we'll see if there really is less energy use, or there really, is more recycled content in the box and so forth. And so these are the initiatives that I think are helping us.
Well, that's exciting.
It's not just an issue of China and the US, right? There are lots of countries that were affected by this or who have seen an opportunity in this. Can you kind of lay out a little bit of the playing field of global politics around garbage for us?
Well, there's a lot of sad stories here, but after the Chinese sword, which was the most recent activity to say that we don't want to take this so-called recyclables anymore because it's too contaminated, where was the stuff going to go? And so some smaller Asian countries said, well, we'll take it, Vietnam and so forth. And they just, there was so much going into China, which is itself such a large country with such a large population, that a smaller country just can't handle it. If nothing else, they don't have the port facilities and the infrastructure and so forth. So we saw a succession of openings and closing in the first couple of years. And saddest of all for me to say today is that when China shut down, India thought there was an opportunity, and a lot of this material started going to India. And now, as we know, India is in a tragic situation with COVID and everything. And so now that door is being closed. And so all over again, we're looking for places to go. And my rule is if you're going to make the trash, because the trash doesn't make itself, then you ought to have a local place to put it. And you shouldn't have to burden other countries. One state shouldn't burden another state. Connecticut, we're in a situation where one of our waste to energy plants is, 30 or 40 years old, and it's going to have to shut down, and we're going to have to take waste to Ohio. Well, why would Ohio want our waste? Sure, there's a business and it's profitable, but I think the right thing to do is to try to keep it local and to take care of your own stuff for the sake of the environment and for the sake of what's right.
I absolutely agree with that. The companies that we work with, and again, speaking just for the state of South Carolina, they of course tapped into those smaller Asian markets. But fortunately in the Southeast U.S., because of our industrial background, we do have a lot of companies that manufacture materials that are huge buyers of those recycled materials, specifically the number one PET plastics, your water bottles and soda bottles and things like that. We've got a couple of very big time buyers that reside in the Southeast. And so our companies that we contract with to process these materials, they're technically global companies, but they operate on a local level, and the materials that we generate in the Southeast at least somewhat do try to, they do try to tap those markets as best they can. And some of our companies that we work with also operate their own paper mills. So those are, recycled material paper mills. They don't use virgin materials. So we've been very lucky that we have that type of industry already in existence. But even with that going on, we generate so much volume that they have still had to tap into the smaller Asian markets. And that reflects back to us as far as pricing. They're shipping it into a different place, and that those different places have different regulations. And can they always take all that material? No. Does the company stockpile it? Do they try to find another buyer? You can only find somebody to buy that material if somebody's making another product with that material. And that comes down to the price of the natural resource versus the price of what the recycled content material is.
Jess, is that kind of like why we don't recycle glass?
The glass issue is a whole different ballgame. There's actually a pretty substantial market for glass, but transporting glass in most of the area is very difficult and very costly. The company that takes the glass, they were taking it from the materials recovery facility directly, but they upped their prices because of contamination. So it's the same issue, but it's just a parallel issue. So this glass company is based in the United States, and they manufacture, new glass from the old glass. But the contamination rate was something like 50%. And because of them having to handle that material, they wound up going up in price with the MRFs. And the MRFs were not able to justify paying that additional cost. So most of them got out of it, and a lot of private companies thought they were going to step in, and then discovered that the handling, the price, and everything, it was substantial. There is still and continues to be a very strong market for glass, but when we make that residential glass, how we handle it, how we process it, how we get it to that processor plays into it. In addition to that, while glass is infinitely recyclable, it's not as easy to melt glass and to make new glass as it is to melt aluminum. If you look at the temperatures required, just simply the temperatures required, that energy is pretty substantial when it comes to recycled glass. And when you're manufacturing glass from its core elements, your natural resources of sand and lime and things like that, it's really cheaper to do that than it is to expend the heat energy to make it out of recycled material. It becomes an issue of cost-benefit analysis at that point in time.
Gotcha.
The local governments and local materials recovery facilities, it was not feasible. However, I'm still hopeful we can find a solution.
Okay. Well, maybe with Marian's research with the Remade Institute, maybe something will be coming down the pike soon, I hope. All right, let's close out this episode because I have a feeling we've got a lot still to talk about Holland. So, Marian, what is an essential element that we need to know to understand the stories of garbage and trash?
Well, this is my own opinion. I'm just warning you. But I used to be, I alluded to this, I used to run a bonding authority that was financing waste solutions, mostly waste to energy. Some people call them incinerators, but incinerator actually has a different meaning, which is that you're just burning stuff and the smoke comes out the chimney. Waste to energy means that you're doing something useful with the waste, and you're actually able to supply energy to and hook up to urban grids and so forth. So I prefer that. I know that a lot of people don't like that, but it's interesting to think about it as a form of reusing something that's otherwise going into the ground. It's not as efficient as running an energy plant because it does more than energy. It does waste. So anyhow, but what I think is, and when I was head of this authority, people would come up to me in the public meetings and they'd say mean things and everything. And why do you have to put it in my backyard and all that kind of stuff? And it occurred to me that I'm just the middle person, right? I didn't make this waste. I've just been asked to find a place to put it down somewhere. And it's really about our consumption, and it's really about just the way we acquire things and the way we eat a lot and everything else. And those things are fine, but it's part of your responsibility to me to say it's okay to make waste as long as you can reuse it safely or dispose of it safely, and it's not so expensive that it makes the city budgets, overwhelmed, because it's just waste. It's not like police are educating our customers, are educating our children, and having libraries and so forth. And so that's why I think that we have to really remember the source, and the source is us.
Wow. That is so well said. Thank you so much. How about you, Jess?
I guess I have a couple of last points. One is that recycling is not and has never been free. We were a little bit spoiled because China was willing to take so much, but people don't understand now that it's a service and you have to pay for that service, whether or not somebody's making money off of it, which obviously and arguably they certainly are making money off of it. Otherwise they wouldn't be in business. Recycling is not free. And people need to understand that when they're considering the differences between the ability to recycle something versus throw it in the landfill, that recycling is substantially and significantly cheaper than a landfill. Landfills are cost prohibitive when it comes to building and maintaining them over their lifespan. And recycling is simply one step in the reduce, recycle, reuse, recycle equation. And recycling is not the be-all, end-all. When consumers make purchases, consumers need to consider the end of life of that purchase. Can you reuse this product? Is it going to make waste in the end? And when it does make waste, what are you going to do with that? So I would argue that a consumer needs to look for reusable products more than anything. And when you cannot reuse that product, then consider, can you recycle it? Recycling for us is really kind of that end step, with a landfill being a whole different ballgame that we would rather you avoid altogether if possible. But you are always going to make trash. Landfills are there for that trash that you have to make. The stuff that you don't have to make, your single-use plastics and things like that, try to reduce, reuse, recycle.
Wow. Holland. Shoo. This is so good.
Right? I never knew there was so much to know about what happens after the trash truck pulls away from my house. But while we wait for part 2, please consider leaving us a shining review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And please go to the afterwordpodcast.com and become a subscriber. We want to say special thanks to Jess and Marian and remind everyone that, as always, you are welcome at our table. See you next week.